Welcome back to another session. I know there's been so many to choose from. Here we are on session number 6. There's number 7 afterwards, and then we've got a final keynote session being delivered by Mark Sparvel. Mark Sparvel is a principal from Australia that now works for Microsoft. I think it's going to be a really thought-provoking and inspiring closing keynote to our 2-day EdTech Festival. I want to say a big thank you to everybody for your involvement in these 2 days. I hope you've enjoyed picking from such an array of sessions. I want to reassure you that there's going to be a catch-up option after the event that you'll be able to come back and dip in and out. Now, I just want to introduce the next speaker for this session, Matt. Matt, I have been working with Matt now on and off for a few years, and he does some really awe-inspiring stuff with analytics, AI. He's also a school governor. He's been working with EdTech for years, really sort of pioneering, I believe, some some great outcomes that can be delivered in education through the use of good analytics. And his title today is School Improvement and Professional Development, Technological and Analytical Approaches. I said, look, it's a bit of a long title, Matt, but I think it's going to be a fascinating talk because really I know that we've spent many years using data, dare I say it, as a management tool to sometimes just set targets for teachers, and it's hard sometimes to know if that's had an impact. But I know when you have professional dialogue that really supports teachers to look a little bit deeper around the way we're working, you can bring about amazing change. So I'm looking forward to this session. I'm going to hand over to you now. Matt, welcome, and thanks for being with us leading this session.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear, that's all good.
Stuff. All right, and good afternoon, everyone. It's certainly is a fun-packed, filled event. I was presenting on a session yesterday talking about some experience in governance and how we use tools actually in my own kind of personal setting rather than professional capacity as chair of governors. It will be interesting seeing Jonathan's reaction to this presentation too, because actually what I'm going to go through, where I've been working with Cornerstones, as Jonathan says, off and on over a few years now, it's been really focused around assessment data, which is a very exciting session after this one on the leadership track. Join myself and Alex, Jonathan's head of curriculum, when we talk about that. But really what I'm going to be talking about now over the next 25 minutes, half an hour, is really been born out of some work that we have been engaged with over a couple of years, that kind of started within the independent sector. Places like Wellington College, Royal Grammar School, Guildford, have been helping us build, and we initially developed these kind of systems for them. But we're also now, working in the state sector, looking at professional development and tying in school improvement rather than just having a focus around assessment data. So that's what I'm going to talk about over the next half an hour or so. A little bit about my background then. I've founded a company called Coscol about 14 years ago. I used to work for Microsoft, so everything that I'm going to kind of talk to you about has got a background in working with Microsoft Office 365, certainly some of the analytics tools that they use, such as Power BI, and applications that are built for Office 365 environments. Okay, so where I want to start is to really talk about the school development process. So in my experience, and I kind of work with everything from some of the UK's largest multi-academy trusts all the way down to some of the smallest and most innovative, as well as, like I said, individual schools within the independent sector. And fairly common, you have a MAT vision or school vision. It might be a 3-year vision or a 4-year vision, and you have the annual school development kind of process, and it's built around what leadership want, and teachers contribute, and parents contribute, and governors contribute. Quite often then you have that kind of situation pretty much divorced from what is still typically commonly called, certainly within maintained school environments, performance management. Much more progressively, we're talking now about professional development rather than performance management, but performance management as a term, of course, still exists. And quite often, I see this kind of chasm between, what a school or a multi-academy trust may be aiming for in terms of its aims and objectives and success criteria, and actually some of the performance management targets that happen on an individual kind of member of staff level. So I'm starting with this picture to really kind of just give that illustration then that school development, in my view, is really much it's powered by professional development of the people that work in the organisation. And that's borne out by, if you look at school budgets, if you're actually looking to invest in a way to improve school performance, school budget may be anywhere from 72% to 87% spent on staffing, and that human resource is really the school's most valuable asset. So anything that we can do to aid the development of staff, and also the attract, recruit, retain staff, especially at the moment in terms of the world in which we live, and all the impacts to well-being that we see going on. That's really where you're going to get bigger bang for your buck in terms of looking at where you're placing that investment, and the return that you can get on that in terms of improving school performance. Quite often I see this missing link there, school development and professional development or performance management. Quite often the department development is also something else that sits outside that sort of wheel, if you like. And I just want to make the case for considering all three of these things as kind of tightly interconnected within there. My last point is, those kind of relationships between these things. Some people may start at that kind of school level, is to kind of top-down approach to say, well, what are our school aims, and actually drive that all the way through to the professional development piece. And others may actually look at it from the bottom up, say, well, what are our strengths? What are our key assets being the people, and how do we play to our strengths in terms of the human resources that we have available to us? Now, my next slide, this is purposefully messy. I've used this slide before. It's a favourite of mine. It's got all sorts of things on here. And this is really looking at a typical data picture across a school estate. I'll use a tree map, and I kind of round off with a Power BI tree map towards the end of this presentation. But basically, the size of these boxes are kind of representing the amount of effort, the amount of data, the volume of data that we go in terms of tracking and generating this information. And this may be reported to a kind of CEO level, a leadership level. Within here, it may be reporting to parents. You've got a load of boundaries in here, so all those little grey lines that you can see. It's a complex landscape because you might have data in an HR system, you might have data in a facilities management system. Within there, you've clearly got data in your management information system, the mainstay of where all the student data lives. And what I've done with the red boxes is just kind of pinpoint, actually, when we're talking about the kind of school improvement data and the professional development data. It's actually residing in quite a small spots, and typically pockets of disconnected data sources in an organisation, particularly in a multi-academy trust, less so within a single school. But the information, the truth is out there. Some of that data, whatever the systems that you use, you'll be able to actually leverage some of that data and help make more sense of it for looking at how professional development and school improvement are kind of intertwined. I'm going to kind of take you through this in examples of the ways in which we've worked, again, in independent and state schools, both single schools and multi-academy trusts, and hopefully make an argument that actually a lot of this can be really quite straightforward. There are repeatable patterns that we can see with school development planning, school improvement planning, department development and professional development. Hopefully it's not controversial for me to say a lot of people, a lot of schools believe they may be unique. They believe that actually something that they do inside their DNA is really radically different to how many other people can operate. Having worked across a number of sectors and helped in those areas, the school development, when you break it down, actually follows a very similar pattern, in terms of that kind of vision or mission, whether it's a 2-year, a 5-year, a 10-year vision or mission statements. Everyone's then got smart objectives in terms of breaking those down over a time frame. It might be a 1 year, might be a 3 year, might be a 5-year time frame, and they have measures of success within it. And then they got a plan assigned to people to actually manage those things to completion. Exactly the same within a department development setting. And I'm using the word department, it may be subject, it may be a particular function. It's not necessarily an academic department function in here. So it depends how you break down those kind of areas of school or trust, and looking to improve those areas. Professional development, the bottom layer of that, if you like, then really has the same kind of flavour to it as well. You've got aims and objectives that, will need to be smart, and you would hope that they would actually be aligned to the school development, both the school development objectives and, of course, the career aspirations of the people involved. They may involve a process in terms of the professional development review, typically an annual cycle, talking about coaching, mentoring, the things that you have in place. And professional observations too, and we use professional observations on purpose rather than lesson observations, because there are all sorts of different types of observations that can happen within an organisation. I use this slide a fair amount. This is dated now. You can see November 2018, but I hope as it came across all your desks, you read that and internalized that. A big part of the work that I do is helping people make sense of large volumes of data and turning it into manageable insight. There were a number of recommendations made out of this, while the focus was really around minimizing the amount of the workload that teachers would need to do, particularly managing assessment data. There are nuggets within here too, I think, that apply more generally, and certainly as we're managing performance data, professional development information, it's really important for us to consider the efficiency of doing so, and not just putting in processes for processes' sake, unless something has a purpose. It is probably a little point in putting that in, and that's where the technology comes in, right? And this is what I'll go through now. These are just examples, and this is just to give you a sense of how others within independent and state are starting to think about the school development, tying the school development to department development, to professional development together. As I alluded to on a slide previously, the school aims are, a set of big, bold aims that are broken then down into success criteria. They may have particular milestones within it, planned projects within it. And this is an example of a tool which we use with Office 365. So it uses an Office 365 credential for logging on, single sign-on within it. It's integrated with Power BI as an Office 365 tool for the analytics side that I'll show you in a second too. And it takes users through that step, in a role-based way that says, okay, there will be someone in school responsible for actually populating these school aims, setting up from an SLT perspective, who's responsible for delivering what kind of projects within it. But having those then actually start to drop from the school development perspective into department development, and all the way through into individual staff aims. And in that way, when actually we look at the analytics, you can see complete traceability, whether it's a single school or group of schools, from PD, aims and objectives, and the traceability, what school aims or MAT aims do those individual PD aims contribute to. And that's really important, because you might find you've got school aims or MAT aims out there, and in those annual cycles, very few staff are actually doing anything that is contributing to achieving those aims. And so you've got then the levers, you've got some sort of tool set to go and address those kind of things before arriving later on in the year and realizing that's the case within there. When we get down to that professional development level, and again, this is really just a presentation by example. I'm not saying one size fits all within here, but there are typical kind of common scenarios within here. So some of these examples here are actually, when you get down to that personal level, it's all about that annual cycle that says at the beginning of the year, and sometimes in some cases it's that may happen prior to the start of an academic year, i.e. we work with schools who are actually setting this up now for September, so they're pre-approved in terms of the aims and targets and ambitions on a personal level for September already. But it's including things that are not just performance related, so a real focus on self-reflection, a real focus on some of the collaborative activities between staff, peer reviews, and those sorts of areas within there. So a few examples of these things would be things like introducing professional development conversations. Now this is, in this particular case, it's an example where it's done outside of line management. So line management are responsible for other things, but it may be a certain pastoral lead, deputy head teacher, those sorts of things where staff are actually having professional development conversations outside of the line management within there. A real focus around responsibilities. Now this is responsibilities outside of the academic section. So much PM and professional development goes on wrongly focused on student assessment data, and there's so much more in terms of staff contributing positively to school improvement that I think generally gets lost. So focusing on some of those responsibilities, and also for schools to be able to review that and look at managing workload and staff well-being. Some of these things are actually survey responses that can be used in that way to positively support staff and get the most from them within there. Professional observations, of course. Now, of course, there are lots of different tools in the market that do these sorts of things, but this is, and it may just be a piece of paper, right? It may be a physical, someone has written something down, they've scanned it in, whatever, that's available in Office 365. At least there's a record of these things. Clearly, digitizing your process creates lots of efficiencies around that. One of which is, as I just mentioned, the collaborative aspects of it. So actually being able to share the observations either that you have done or that have occurred on you with your line management, for peers for review, and having discussion around those. So it's not a thing that says, here's an observation. So here's an observation, you reflect on the observation, you have dialogue then with the observer or your line management within that, and actually build better practice on the end of it. Of course, there's lots of different ways of supporting that, whether it's ITT or NQT, all those kind of standard forms, but also it may not be it's called a professional observation, it might be support staff within there too. or specific practice looking at SEN or other areas of the school. So that's all kind of workflow related, but hopefully it's given you a flavour that this is not, we shouldn't just be looking at the performance management aspects here. We should be looking at how we invest in these technological approaches to support staff development to get biggest bang for our buck in terms of helping to improve outcomes. And this is where analytics can really come in and help, in particular leadership roles, whether that's at a school or a group of schools level. So this is, how we move to actually looking at some of the exceptions within here, who's struggling, who's not doing something, maybe from a compliance perspective, but moving away. And this is, this is happening, moving away from always looking at the reactive, looking at the history of things, and actually using data and information to help us, understand what's likely to happen in the future. So I'll cut over in a second, and actually we'll have a quick play with something that's live. But here's a set of slides. So for example, this is not the be all and end all, but for example, compliance across the state. So actually to be able to look at any point in time and say, okay, well, where are our staff in a school or across a mat in their journey around professional development? How many PDR aims have actually been submitted? How many have been approved? How many have been rejected? Let's look at the roles within there. So simply from a compliance perspective, you could save a lot of time by using these analytics. The analytics, as I said, if you're thinking about where these from or how they're built, this is Microsoft Power BI at the end of the day. So the apps sit within the Office 365 infrastructure. The data then we make available through Power BI, so it can be used and built on top of. Things like activity profiling. When is activity happening during the year? Are we overloading people all at the same time? Not just staff with PD thing, but line management, maybe HR resources. Is there a way in which you could, particularly across groups of schools, resource level some of the things that you're doing and therefore free up time? Do you need as many staff looking at these things all on certain key dates, or are there better ways to do it? So looking at actually the profiling of who is doing what and when is interesting. Workload, I'll come back to. It's really important to, you can't stress enough at this time, teacher wellbeing, staff wellbeing. My wife is a teacher while I'm a technologist, I guess, and a governor. My wife is an assistant head teacher and currently teaches year 3. So I understand this only too well. This is an anonymized report here, which it would have staff names within here, but it's an indication within that blue segment within the center of the screen there, just how much writing, just how much activity is going on for each one of these members of staff in autumn, spring and summer, and this represents the level of activities that they're planning to do. And you can see everyone's got this peak during autumn, still strong in spring, slopes off a little bit in summer for many within there. So we're looking at tools about how we can actually use both quantitative and qualitative analytics within there. We also can use different kind of visual representations too. So, here's an example that's just, it's a tree map, and we use color, and where the size of the box represents the volume of activity that's going on in these areas of the system. So this is really just, jumping out and saying, actually, most of the descriptive work that's going on, where people feel most of their work is really in sections around their curricular teaching in there. Certainly a lot of work around, the main areas of responsibilities. And then a kind of sliding scale as those boxes get as the boxes get smaller, there's less activity, less workload involved in those sorts of areas within there too. And again, from a management and a leadership perspective, you can use this to go, well, we thought we were having a bit more of a focus, on certain areas. Why is that not coming through in how people are using the system? So I'm going to just round off now by kind of bringing it all together. I've talked quite quickly, around the school improvement priorities, school development, and mapping that within the professional development areas as well. One of the areas clearly that we work, I personally and my company, is really in terms of making turning data into meaningful information to make better decisions, and that data comes from all sorts of different places. What we've just been talking about is professional development. But of course, when you start to add in performance management, you do want to look at things like student performance, progress data, some of those things within there. You might want to be looking at HR data related to staff, which come from either HR systems or the MIS in terms of staff absence, illness, some of those sorts of things within there too. So just to kind of, draw all these things together, the way that I think good schools and good trusts are starting to use some of the analytics power, especially available through things like Microsoft Power BI, is to understand that actually what happens in one data silo could really be impacting data in another area, and this is a way in which a number of schools and trusts are now starting to work to bring these things together. Now, I spent so long talking. Now this is going to have logged me off in the background and logged me back in within there. But what it's doing is it's actually going, okay, in this particular case, perhaps I've got a primary estate, either a primary school or primary schools in my multi-academy trust. I've got access to my Power BI information about the attainment and progress of every year group within those that I can get into. I've got access to things like public data. So actually, if there's in this case Key Stage 2 performance data, it might be Key Stage 4 performance data. We map onto all the national public data sources. It might be finance, it might be workforce census returns, it might be Ofsted judgments and reports, and bring all of those things in there. You can see in here I've got my school development analytics within here too, which is just the thing that I've just been talking to you about, but to show it is just one part of a greater whole. When you're considering your school or your MATS data strategy in there, I've got access to all of my staffing information within there too. You may have third-party analytics in there. Group Call, for example, provide Power BI analytics across attendance, achievement, behavior, end of key stage things within there, or even third-party assessment data such as GL assessment, which is going to be the topic of my next talk in probably 10 minutes time. So hopefully that's kind of given you a whistle-stop tour kind of view in terms of when we talk about school improvement, school development planning, some of the benefits about tying that into the professional development cycle. See these things as absolutely intrinsically linked, because they are. And some of the things there in terms of how you can visualize that data and provide that data, not only in terms of the workflow, in terms of apps, there's lots of providers that do it, but really importantly, try to bring that data, leverage that data to bring it as part of a much bigger whole with other data that's residing in your estate. And that's the way that you'll drive real value from this information and improve performance. So with that, I'm going to pause. I'm going to hand back over to Jonathan and see if there's any Q&A.
Thank you, Matt. That's just really informative. As I said, we don't have any questions that have pinged in yet, but often is the case when a speaker comes to an end and I do a cry for questions, they will come in. So if you're at home at the moment and you're watching, at work and watching, wherever you are at the moment and watching, if you're able to post any questions you may have, we can get Matt to answer them. So just whilst we wait for some questions to come in, Matt, obviously you've talked about your next session, which you will be heading off to in a moment. But if I just do a little plug for that one with everybody who's watching, because Matt has just shown a slide around the use of some of the GL assessments, and we as a trust here have been using those GL assessments that Matt has put up on his slide, and we've been using that to triangulate the needs around a child. So historically, often data was used to maybe set a global target for a school within a trust, or for a year group within a school, or for a teacher within a year group that says, look, we want you to get 80%, or whatever that target may be. And the conversation then is very top down, and you can start to unpick, are we going to get there or not? What we're using is this data to say, who are the children that maybe are not making the progress we'd expect? Why are they not making the progress? What are the strategies we could use to really target that child? So Matt's just showing on the screen at the moment a pupil dashboard, and it's looking at a whole raft of assessments. So we look at the attitudes a child has towards himself as a learner, towards school and the teachers and the work. We look at whether they are maybe have those dyslexic tendencies, dyscalculia tendencies, whether there are any biases in their cognitive thinking and the way their brain works in terms of memory. And we would build this picture around a child. When you start to combine that with other data like attendance information, you get a really powerful picture around why a child may or may not be making progress. Maybe a child is making good progress, but they can make better progress. And that is going to be unpicked in the next session that Matt is about to be running. I think if you can then combine that with that other powerful data and using it analytically to look at how your organization is running, how you're best utilizing your staff, you can see that you can get a complete picture of your school, of your trust at a trust level, and to see where you need to best use the resources, human resources and physical resources, to get the best outcomes for you in your organization, for the staff, for the learners. So I think that next session is going to look really great. Matt, I'd want to say a big thank you to you for the time that you've given, a really insightful talk and really helpful. I would suggest that anyone who's on this session, or maybe watching this as a catch up of the recording of this session, do get in touch with Matt. There is his email address and his website. Do get in touch with us as a school, as a trust, where we can share how we're using some of these analytics to impact on the way that we're working. It is something, when people are just heading out with the use of ed tech and trying to get a first live lesson going, might seem way down the line. But actually, there are things you can begin to do in these early stages that you may find really helpful. So thanks, Matt. Thanks for your time. And I'm not on the next session, but I hope the session goes well for you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thanks to all.
Thank you.